The sound of the pen hitting the table was sharp, flat, and final. It was the kind of sound that doesn't belong in a home built on 3 years of history. Era didn't flinch. One hand was on her designer handbag. The other pushed the thick stack of papers toward the man sitting in the faded blue work shirt. Nobody spoke. Not the movers waiting at the door. Not the driver idling the luxury sedan outside. Because nobody leaves a man like Min, solid, loyal, and steady, for the flash of a street-level kingpin. Nobody does that. And yet the ink was drying on the kitchen table. Era's eyes were cold.
Hey, besties.
Welcome to Clemency Love Stories. If you're ready to see a corporate bully get what's coming to him, hit that subscribe button. Let us know where you're watching from. Is it morning or night for you? Now, let's get back to the takedown. June was standing by the window, adjusting his luxury watch and smiling like he'd already won the lottery. That's when the doorbell rang. Slow, quiet, deliberate. One man walked in. No suit, no noise, just a single black briefcase. And June, the untouchable Mafia boss, suddenly forgot how to breathe. The house smelled like cheap coffee and impending regret. Every second in here meant something. Every signature had a consequence. Aradello knew that, or she thought she did. 3 years in this mediocre life. 1,000 days of pretending she was meant for more. She was still the woman who complained about the grease on his hands. Still the one who looked at his blue-collar paycheck and saw a ceiling, not a foundation. She didn't talk about her husband to her new, high-society friends. Didn't mention his last name unless she had to. She wanted to erase this world of small rooms and budget groceries because she felt she was born for the penthouse. She had built a fantasy in her head, fueled by the promises June whispered in the dark. But some foundations are made of stone, and some are made of sand. They just wait for the tide. The neighbors gossiping over the fence didn't know. The lover waiting to take her away didn't know. The Mafia boss currently adjusting his cufflink and looking down on the worker in the blue shirt definitely didn't know. And the woman walking out that door, seductive in her red dress, convinced she was choosing the bigger man? She didn't know either. She looked at Min and saw a mechanic. Rugged, simple, unprotected. She had no idea who his subordinates were. Her heart raced. Not the kind of race that comes from love, but the kind that comes from greed. Era had been planning this for 6 months. The black luxury sedan was her chariot. She didn't look back at the grease stains on the table or the man holding a stack of cash he'd scraped together for her. She moved, because that's what you did when you chose the upgrade. You moved fast. Min was good at all of it. He had been good at playing the husband, the underdog, the man who stayed quiet while she mocked his small life. He touched the wedding band on the table without thinking. A reflex now, like counting money. The metal caught the fluorescent light as Era turned the corner.
Mindello.
The name meant something in the shadows of the city. Not the kind of something you put on a mailbox. The kind you whispered in the dark to ensure you stayed alive. Her new boss had built a reputation piece by piece, year by year, in rooms Era thought she'd never visit. She had made her choice at the kitchen table. She had a new life. She had a rich boss. She had an hour left of being the most powerful woman in the room, without realizing she was already the most vulnerable. Old habits die hard. The Dello name meant something, and she was about to find out exactly what it cost to give it up. Era stood by the window of their small apartment. She watched the movers carry the last of her suitcases toward the waiting black car. This place always smelled like old wood and the heavy grease Min brought home from the garage. For 3 years, she had hated that smell. She had lived in this poverty because she thought Min was just a man with no big dreams. She looked at the peeling paint on the walls and felt a wave of anger. She had wasted the best years of her life playing the wife of a simple worker. In her mind, those 3 years were a long prison sentence. She wanted silk sheets, not the scratchy blankets they bought on sale. She wanted the world to look at her with envy, not pity. Across the room, Min sat at the small kitchen table. He didn't look like a man who had just lost his wife. He looked calm, almost too calm. He was looking down at an old, scratched phone. Era thought it was just his cheap work phone, the one he used to talk to customers about fixing their engines. She didn't know that the screen was glowing with numbers that would make her head spin. Min's thumb moved across the screen with purpose. While Era was busy thinking about her new life with June, Min was finishing a deal. He wasn't looking at garage bills. He was looking at a multi-million-dollar transaction for a shipment moving across the ocean. With a few taps, he moved more money than Era had seen in her entire life. He hit the send button just as Era turned around to give him one last look of disgust. "You really are a sad man, Min," Era said. She smoothed her red dress and grabbed her designer bag. "You're happy with so little. You'll spend the rest of your life in that greasy blue shirt while I finally live the life I deserve. June can give me things you can't even imagine." Min finally looked up. He didn't look angry.
He didn't beg her to stay.
He just gave her that small, knowing smirk that made her feel uneasy for a split second. He set the phone down on the table, the screen going dark. He picked up the stack of cash he had been holding. It was several $1,000s tied together with a simple rubber band. He tossed it lightly onto the table. "Take it, Era," Min said. His voice was steady and deep. "Think of it as a parting gift. You'll need it where you're going." Era laughed, a sharp and mean sound. "A few $1,000s? That won't even pay for one of June's watches. You keep your scrapings, Min. You'll need them for rent." She didn't see the way Min's eyes went cold. She didn't notice that his work phone buzzed with a message from June that read, "The meeting is set, boss. I am ready for your orders." Era simply walked out the door, her high heels clicking loudly on the floor. She thought she was leaving a man who had nothing. She thought she was finally escaping a life of struggle. She didn't know that the man sitting at the table was the one who owned the very car she was about to step into. She didn't know that her rich, new lover was currently shaking with fear, waiting for a call from the very man she had just called a disappointment. Era closed the door behind her, leaving the grease and the poverty behind, walking straight into a trap she had set for herself. The roar of a high-powered engine filled the quiet street, drowning out the sound of the wind. Era stood on the porch, her eyes bright with excitement. A sleek, silver sports car pulled up to the curb, stopping right in front of Min's old, rusted truck. The contrast was embarrassing. The silver car looked like a predator made of chrome and glass, while Min's truck looked like a pile of scrap metal. June stepped out of the driver's seat. He looked like he walked straight out of a luxury magazine. His suit was a dark, expensive gray, and his hair was perfectly styled with not a single strand out of place. He adjusted his sunglasses and looked up at the small house with a look of pure disgust. He didn't see a home. He saw a shack that was beneath him. "Era, darling," June called out, his voice smooth and full of fake warmth. "Are you ready to leave this dump? I can't breathe in this neighborhood." Era ran down the steps, her red dress flowing behind her. She didn't look back once. She reached June and let him wrap an arm around her waist. She felt like she was finally where she belonged. She felt powerful. Min walked out onto the porch slowly. He was still wearing his blue work shirt with the grease stains on the pocket. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest. He didn't look sad or angry. He just watched them with a calm, steady gaze that seemed to see right through June's expensive suit. June saw Min and let out a loud, mocking laugh. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small roll of $100 bills. "Hey, grease monkey," June shouted. "I know it's hard losing a woman like Era, but let's be honest, you could never afford her. Here's a little something for your troubles. Maybe you can buy some soap that actually works." With a flick of his wrist, June tossed the money into the air. The bills fluttered down like green leaves, landing in the dirt and the oil spots on the driveway. Era laughed, leaning her head on June's shoulder. She thought it was the most dominant thing she had ever seen. She thought June was the king of the world. Min didn't move for a moment. He looked at the money lying in the dirt. Then he walked down the stairs. He moved with a quiet, powerful grace that June didn't notice. Min bent down and picked up the bills one by one. He didn't look humiliated. He didn't look small. He straightened the money out and tucked it into his pocket. "Thanks, June," Min said. His voice was low and carried a strange weight. "I'll make sure this goes exactly where it belongs." June didn't even listen. He just smirked and opened the car door for Era. "Don't spend it all in one place, loser," June yelled over his shoulder. Era sat in the leather seat, the smell of new car and expensive cologne filling her senses. She felt a rush of victory as June slammed the door and walked around to the driver's side. As the car sped away, leaving a cloud of dust behind, she looked in the side mirror. She saw Min standing in the driveway, holding the stack of cash and watching them leave. She thought she saw him smirk. She thought he looked like a man who just won a bet, but she shook the feeling off. Min was just a worker, and she was with the boss now. She didn't know that the money June threw on the ground had originally come from Min's own accounts. She didn't know that every time June smiled, he was doing exactly what Min expected him to do. She was moving toward a life of luxury, but she was leaving the only man who truly held the power. The iron gates to June's estate opened slowly, revealing a driveway lined with white stone. Era leaned back against the soft leather seat, her eyes wide as she took in the sight. The mansion was huge, with tall marble pillars and windows that reached the sky. To her, this was the finish line. This was the prize for finally leaving the small rooms and the smell of garage oil behind. She felt a sense of pride as June parked the car. She stepped out and walked toward the front door, her red dress standing out against the white stone like a flame. Inside, the house was even more beautiful. The floors were made of polished wood, and huge glass lights hung from the ceiling. Era walked through the living room, touching the expensive velvet sofas and looking at the gold frames on the walls. She felt like she had finally arrived. She was no longer just a wife. She was the partner of a powerful man. She imagined herself hosting parties here, wearing diamonds and drinking the best wine. June walked over to a small bar in the corner and poured 2 glasses of deep red wine. He handed one to Era, but his hand was shaking just a little bit. He didn't look at her with the same smug smile he had used at Min's house. His face looked tight, and he kept glancing at his gold watch. "Drink up, Era," June said. He took a large gulp of his own wine, nearly finishing the glass in one go. "We have to be ready. I have a very important meeting tonight." Era took a sip of the wine. It was sweet and expensive, but the mood in the room felt heavy. "You seem stressed, June. Is it the deal we talked about?" June walked to the window and pulled back the curtain, staring out into the dark driveway. "It's more than a deal. My superior is coming to visit. He's the one who makes all the big decisions. He's the one who provides the capital for everything I own. If he isn't happy with my performance, everything could change in a second." Era was surprised. She thought June was the man at the top. She thought he was the one who gave the orders. "Your superior? I thought you were the boss, June. You told me you owned this city." June turned around, and for a second, Era saw a flash of real fear in his eyes. He laughed, but it sounded nervous and thin. "I am a boss, Era. But in our world, there is always someone higher. There is a man who stays in the shadows, someone so powerful that even the police won't say his name. I've worked for him for 5 years, and I've only seen his face a handful of times. He's cold, he's smart, and he doesn't forgive mistakes." June's phone buzzed on the table. He jumped as if he had been shocked. He grabbed the phone and read the message, his face turning pale. He started pacing back and forth, adjusting his tie over and over again. He even straightened a painting on the wall that was already perfectly straight. "He's on his way," June whispered, more to himself than to her. "He's coming here to check the books. He heard about the divorce, and he wants to make sure I'm focused on the business." Era felt a chill go down her back. She looked at her glass of red wine, which suddenly didn't taste as sweet. She had left Min because she wanted to be with the strongest man she could find. She wanted to be at the top of the mountain. But looking at June, a man who was sweating in his expensive suit just because a superior was coming, she realized she was still standing in a shadow. She didn't know that the man June was so afraid of was currently sitting in the back of a black SUV, wearing a clean suit and holding a phone that was still logged into the same account as Min's work phone. She didn't know that the superior already knew exactly what June's living room looked like. Era took another sip of wine, trying to ignore the feeling that her new, perfect life was already starting to feel very small. The night of the grand gala arrived, and the mansion was buzzing with energy. For Era, This was the moment she had been waiting for ever since she left the small, grease-stained house. She stood in front of a giant gold mirror in the master bedroom, looking at her reflection. She was wearing the bold red dress, the color of a flame. It fit her perfectly, and the silk felt like water against her skin. She had spent hours on her hair and makeup, making sure she looked like a queen. She put on a pair of diamond earrings that June had given her, and as they caught the light, she felt a rush of power. In her old life, the biggest night out was a burger at the local diner after Min finished a long shift at the garage. Now, she was preparing for the underworld's biggest night. She felt untouchable. She felt like she had finally shed her old skin and become the woman she was always meant to be. She didn't think about Min at all. She didn't think about the quiet man in the blue shirt or the dusty driveway. To her, that man was a ghost from a life she had successfully escaped. June walked into the room, looking sharp in a black tuxedo. He looked at Era and nodded, but his eyes were still filled with that strange, nervous twitch. He was constantly checking his phone and adjusting his cufflinks. He looked like a man who was walking toward a cliff, but Era was too caught up in her own reflection to notice. She grabbed her small clutch bag and walked toward him, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "You look stunning, Era," June said, though his voice was a bit shaky. "Tonight is very important. Every major player in the city will be at this gala. And more importantly, my superior will be there. We have to be perfect. No mistakes." Era smiled and leaned in to straighten his tie. "Stop worrying, June. We are the most powerful couple in the room. Nobody can touch us now." They walked down the grand staircase together. A long, black limousine was waiting for them at the front door. As Era stepped inside the car, she felt a sense of complete victory. She looked out the window as the gates of the estate opened. She saw the city lights in the distance and felt like they all belonged to her. She believed she had made the smartest move of her life. She believed she had traded a worker for a king. The car moved smoothly through the streets, headed toward the most expensive hotel in the city. Era adjusted her red dress one last time. She felt like a star about to walk onto a stage. She didn't know that the superior June was so afraid of had already arrived at the hotel. She didn't know that the seating chart for the main table had been personally approved by a man who knew exactly how she liked her coffee in the morning. Era stepped out of the limousine and onto the red carpet, her head held high and a confident smile on her face. She walked into the gala feeling like she owned the world, never realizing that she was walking straight into the arms of the truth. The grand ballroom was filled with the sound of clinking glasses and expensive music. Era moved through the crowd, her red dress catching the light of 100 crystal chandeliers. She held a glass of champagne and looked around at the men in suits and the women in jewels. For the first time in her life, she felt like she was standing exactly where she belonged. June was by her side, nodding to other men who looked just as rich as he did. Era felt like a queen on her throne. She was certain that every woman in the room was looking at her with jealousy. "Se, Era," June whispered, though he still looked a bit pale. "This is the world I promised you. Everyone who matters is in this room." Era smiled, feeling a rush of pride. She thought about Min for a split second, imagining him sitting at home in his greasy chair with a cold sandwich. She almost laughed at the memory. She felt sorry for the woman she used to be. She was about to say something to June when the massive oak doors at the entrance of the ballroom swung open. The change in the room was instant. It was like someone had sucked all the air out of the building. The music didn't just fade. The band stopped playing in the middle of a note. The loud talking died down until the only thing you could hear was the soft hum of the air conditioner. Era frowned, looking toward the door. She expected to see a team of guards, or maybe the mayor. Instead, a single man walked in. He wasn't wearing a blue work shirt. He wasn't covered in garage grease. He was wearing a black suit that looked so expensive it made June's tuxedo look like a cheap costume. His hair was perfectly styled, and he moved with a quiet, terrifying power. He didn't have to shout to be noticed. His presence was so heavy that people stepped back to make a path for him without being asked. Next to her, Era heard a sharp sound. June's hand had started to shake so violently that his glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered, splashing red wine across the hem of Era's bold red dress. June didn't even notice. He didn't apologize. He didn't even breathe. His eyes were wide with a fear so deep it made him look like a different person. Era looked back at the man in the doorway. Her heart skipped a beat, then started to hammer against her ribs. She blinked, sure that her eyes were playing a trick on her in the dim light. But the man got closer, walking straight toward the head table. It was Min. But it wasn't the Min she knew. This man didn't look like a tired mechanic. He looked like a king who had come to reclaim his territory. His eyes, which used to look at her with kindness and patience, were now as cold as ice. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the luxury around him. He looked like he owned every single stone in the building. The superior that June had been trembling over for days wasn't some mysterious stranger from another city. It was the man Era had called a disappointment. It was the husband she had mocked for having a small life. As Min reached the center of the room, every powerful man in the ballroom bowed their head. The silence was absolute. Era felt a cold chill spread from her toes to her chest. She looked at June, who was sweating through his expensive shirt, and then at Min, who stood in the center of the light. She realized in that moment that she hadn't traded a worker for a boss. She had divorced the man who owned the world just to be with one of his servants. The red wine on her dress felt cold and heavy, a stain she knew she would never be able to wash away. Era stared at Min, her brain refusing to believe what her eyes were seeing. Even in that perfect black suit, she told herself this had to be a joke. Min was a mechanic. He was the man who came home with dirt under his fingernails and sat on their old, sagging sofa. She thought he had somehow found a way to sneak into the gala just to try and win her back. She thought he was desperate. Her shock quickly turned into a mean kind of anger because she felt embarrassed that her lowly ex-husband was standing in this beautiful room. She stepped forward, pulling her stained red dress away from her legs. She wanted to hurt him with her words just like she had at the kitchen table. "What are you doing here, Min?" she asked, her voice loud and sharp in the quiet room. "Did you spend all the money June threw in the dirt to buy that suit? You think you can just walk in here and pretend to be someone important? You're embarrassing yourself. This isn't a garage. You don't belong here, and you're certainly not going to win me back by stalking me." She looked around at the crowd, expecting them to laugh at the man in the suit. She expected them to see him as the loser she had left behind. But nobody laughed. The powerful men and wealthy women in the room looked at Era with horror, as if she had just stepped on a landmine. Era turned back to June, reaching for his arm. "June, tell your guards to throw him out. Tell them he's just a worker who doesn't know when to quit." But June wasn't moving. He wasn't listening. He was pale, and his breath was coming in short, gasping pops. Before Era could say another word, June let go of her hand. He didn't just step away, he collapsed. The man who had acted like a king in the silver sports car dropped to his knees on the hard marble floor. The sound of his knees hitting the stone was loud and painful. Era gasped, her mouth hanging open. "June, what are you doing? Get up." June didn't look at her. He didn't even seem to know she was there. He crawled forward on his knees toward Min. His head was bowed so low that his chin touched his chest. Tears of pure terror were running down his face, ruining his expensive look. He reached out with a trembling hand and grabbed Min's hand, pulling it toward his face. June pressed his lips to the heavy gold ring on Min's finger, a sign of total surrender. "Forgive me, boss," June whispered, his voice shaking. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know she was yours. If I had known, I never would have looked at her. Please, Don Min, I was only following the orders to manage the territory. I didn't mean any disrespect." The room stayed silent. Min didn't pull his hand away, and he didn't tell June to get up. He just stood there looking down at June like he was a bug on the sidewalk. The rich boss that Era had chosen was nothing more than a soldier. He was a servant who took orders from the man in the blue work shirt. Era felt like the floor was tilting beneath her feet. She looked at Min, and for the first time, she saw the knowing smirk from the driveway in a whole new way. It wasn't a smirk of sadness. It was the smirk of a man who owned the game, the players, and the board. She realized that every bit of power June had was actually a gift from Min. She had left the master of the house to be with the man who polished his shoes. She stood alone in her red dress, realizing that this small life she had hated was actually the most protected place in the world, and she had just thrown the keys away. Min finally pulled his hand away from June's trembling lips. He didn't look at the man on the floor with anger. He looked at him with nothing at all, which was much scarier. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean white cloth, slowly wiping the spot where June had kissed his ring. The silence in the ballroom felt like it was crushing Era. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like they were made of lead. She stayed frozen in her stained red dress, watching the man she thought she knew disappear behind the face of a king. "You like the lifestyle, don't you, June?" Min asked. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to every corner of the room. The silver car, the mansion with the marble pillars, the expensive wine you like to gulp down when you're nervous. June didn't look up. He just kept his forehead pressed against the cold floor. "Yes, boss. It is an honor to serve." Min turned his eyes toward Era. They were cold and sharp, like two pieces of glass. Era thinks she found a winner. She thinks she moved up from a garage to a palace. She thinks she's wearing diamonds that you bought with your own hard work. Min took a step toward her, and the crowd parted like he was a wave in the ocean. He reached out and touched the diamond earring hanging from Era's ear. She shivered at his touch. "Do you know where these came from, Era?" Era tried to swallow, but her throat was too dry. June gave them to me. He said he earned them." Min let out a short, dark laugh. He turned back to the men at the oak table. "June doesn't earn anything. June is a manager on my payroll. Every dollar he spends is a dollar I allow him to have. The mansion you slept in last night is owned by a company that reports to me. The silver car he used to pick you up was a gift for a job he did last summer. Even the dress on your back was paid for by a credit card that has my name on the master account." Era felt a wave of sickness wash over her. She looked down at the bold red dress. She thought it was her ticket to a new life, but it was just another thing Min owned. Everything she had used to mock him, the wealth, the status, the power, was actually his. She had spent weeks telling June how much better he was than her worker husband, never realizing she was just talking to a puppet. "You told me you were poor," Era whispered, her voice cracking. "You let me live in that tiny house. You let me smell that grease for 3 years. I wanted a wife who loved the man, not the money," Min said, stepping closer until he was standing right in front of her. "I wanted to see if there was anything real under all that greed. For 3 years, I gave you a safe, quiet life. I gave you a home where no one would ever come for your head. I was the Shadow Dawn, Era. I took the grease and the dirt so you wouldn't have to deal with the blood and the ghosts. But you hated the quiet. You wanted the noise." Min reached into his jacket and pulled out the divorce papers she had served him. He held them up for everyone to see. "The moment you signed these, you stopped being the wife of the Dawn. You traded the man who owns the payroll for the man who is on it. You didn't move up, Era. You moved to the very bottom." He looked back down at June, who was still crying on the floor. "And as for the debt of this divorce, June, you've been spending far too much of my money on a woman who is no longer part of this family. I think it's time we settled the books." Era looked at the diamond earrings, the red dress, and the sparkling gala. It all felt like fake stage props now. She had divorced the king because she thought he was a servant, and now she was realizing that the servant she had chosen didn't even own the shoes on his feet. She was standing in a room full of riches, but for the first time in her life, she realized she was completely and utterly broke. Min leaned back in the plush leather chair, the smoke from his cigar swirling toward the ceiling like a ghost. He looked at June with a cold, empty smile. June stood by the window, his heart racing. He was still thinking about the power he would have now that he was with the daughter of a legend. He felt like he had finally won the lottery of life. But Min's next words hit him like a bucket of ice water. "You can stop pretending now, June," Min said, his voice flat and bored. "I just got off the phone with the higher-ups. There's been a change in the wind. Era is no longer protected. She's been cut off from the family assets, and her father has officially turned his back on her. As of 5 minutes ago, She is just another girl on the street with a very dangerous last name. June felt the air leave his lungs. He froze, his hand still resting on the expensive silk curtain. The world around him seemed to shift and turn gray. He didn't think about Era's safety or how she would feel when she found out. He didn't think about the moments they had shared or the promises he had made. He only thought about one thing, his own skin. If Era was no longer protected, she wasn't a prize anymore. She was a target, and anyone standing next to a target usually got hit by the same bullets. All the love he had felt for her over the past few weeks didn't just fade. It vanished instantly. It was like a light switch had been flipped. To June, Era was no longer a beautiful woman or a future queen. She was a heavy weight tied around his neck, pulling him down into deep, dark water. "She's a liability," June whispered, his voice trembling not with sadness, but with fear. He looked at Min, desperate for a way out. "If the syndicate finds out I'm still associated with her, they'll think I'm part of the problem. My boss will think I'm being disloyal." Min chuckled, a dry sound that had no humor in it.
Exactly.
"You're a smart boy, June. You know how this world works. We don't carry dead weight, especially when that weight is marked for disposal. You wanted to climb the ladder, didn't you? Well, the first rule of climbing is knowing when to let go of the things dragging you down." June nodded slowly. The warmth he had felt earlier was gone. He looked down at his hands and realized he was still wearing the expensive watch Era had helped him pick out. Now it felt like a shackle. He realized that every second he spent as her boyfriend was a second he was risking his position within the syndicate. He didn't care that she had chosen him over everyone else. He didn't care that she trusted him with her life. All he cared about was that his ticket to the top had just been canceled. He had to distance himself, and he had to do it fast. The girl he had claimed to love was now the greatest threat to his survival. He looked at Min and straightened his jacket, his face becoming as hard and cold as the stone floor beneath him. The choice was easy. He would save himself, and Era would have to face the storm alone. The heavy glass doors of the gala swung shut, cutting off the sound of the violins and the soft laughter of the rich guests. Min walked down the marble steps with a steady, calm pace. He didn't look back. A sleek, black car was already idling at the curb, its headlights cutting through the misty night air. The driver hopped out quickly to open the rear door. Min slid into the back seat, the door closing with a heavy thud that sounded like a final gavel in a courtroom. As the car pulled away, Min looked out the tinted window for only a second before turning his attention to a tablet on his lap. He had moved on. To him, the deal was done. Inside the lobby, the air felt suddenly too cold. Era stood perfectly still, her hand still reaching out toward the door where June had just been standing. She turned around slowly, looking for him, but June was already gone. He had slipped into the shadows of the hallway the moment Min had finished speaking. He didn't want to be seen with her. He didn't even say goodbye. Era looked down at the divorce papers in her hand. The ink from her signature was dry now. Just an hour ago, she thought those papers were her ticket to freedom. She thought she was leaving a poor man to finally be with someone who truly saw her value. She had felt so powerful when she handed them to Min. She had felt like she was finally taking control of her life. But now, the truth hit her like a physical blow to the chest. She looked around the grand lobby. The gold-leafed pillars and the crystal chandeliers seemed to mock her. She realized that Min had never been the poor husband she needed to escape. He was the king of the very world she was trying to join. He owned the buildings, the cars, and even the people she had trusted. She felt a deep, sickening knot form in her stomach. She had traded a man who truly owned everything for a man who owned nothing but a borrowed suit and a fake smile. June was never going to protect her. He was just a servant, a small piece of the syndicate who was only interested in her when he thought she had power. Now that she was unprotected, she was less than nothing to him. Era slumped against a cold stone pillar. She remembered how she used to look down on Min when he came home late with dirt on his shoes. She had treated him like he was a burden. She realized now that the dirt on his shoes came from building an empire she wasn't smart enough to see. She had divorced a king just to be treated like a toy by a man who was already looking for his next master. She looked at her reflection in the polished floor. The expensive dress she wore felt heavy and uncomfortable. It wasn't a gown of victory. It was a uniform of defeat. She was alone in the middle of a beautiful room, and for the first time in her life, she understood that she had thrown away the only real protection she ever had. The silence of the lobby was loud, and the weight of her mistake felt like it would crush her right there on the floor. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt small or worthless or forgotten, I want you to know something. You're not alone, and you're stronger than you think. If you enjoyed this journey with me, please hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories. People who need to hear them. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had a moment where you'd stood up for yourself? Where you finally said enough? I read every single comment, and I love hearing your stories. And if you want more stories about survival, strength, and second chances, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. I share new stories every week.